Parenting. I'm your host, Greg Freeberry, and I just got back from Mexico for my roommate's wedding. And so I'm a little congested from all the flying and all that stuff and having a good time, obviously, celebrating. So you'll just have to bear with me a little bit today. But we have an amazing guest. We actually have another children's author coming on the show today, Barney Saltzberg. And Barney has been in the game for decades. He's been in the game since the 80s, and he's written many, many children's books that have been very successful. One was even talked up really highly by Melinda Gates. And he just launched a new one. And so we're going to talk about his new book. We're going to talk about creativity and instilling creativity in kids at a very young age. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of other amazing things related to just the creative practice and how you can instill creativity in your kids and how it's an innate ability, but it's also a skill that can be developed. So we'll talk about some ways you can try and build in that creativity and actually work it in to make your kids a little more creative and expand their skill set. So, as always, if you haven't gone to Think&Evolve.academy, please visit my website and you can go read my blog where I write about education and the education field. And you can check out my Instagram at think.and.evolve where I post funny memes and information and informational posts, and I do little reels with my ideas on education. So there's a whole wealth of information there as well. So if you haven't checked me out, my website or my Instagram, please go do that. And without further ado, I give you Barney Saltzberg.
Hello and welcome to Pandemic Parenting. I am your host, Greg Freeberry. And today my guest is Barney Saltzberg, who is a very famous children's author. And he's authored, he's saying, authored dozens of books and been at it for a very, very long time. And he has a new book coming out, which we're going to talk about today. So Barney, thank you and welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you and happy to be here.
Awesome. So I usually like to start out the show just kind of asking you some rapid fire questions just to kind of, let the audience get to know you a little bit. Is that all right with you?
Absolutely.
All right. Well,
no. No, I don't really want to talk. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I see all the guitars in the background. So how about what's your favorite band and why?
It has to be the Beatles. They changed the world, changed my life. And I play the guitar and draw because of John Lennon. Huge influence, and their capacity to, I was just watching a whole thing on them again recently this week, 8 days a week, which talks about their touring days. It's a fairly recent movie, and their ability to change and grow in the short span they were around, from if you listen to their first album and their last, that it's so beautiful. And yeah, it's the Beatles.
All right. That's a great answer, right? The Beatles, they're classic.
Yeah.
All right. One question I like to ask is, so if you could time travel either into the past or into the future, is there a particular time you might want to visit?
Man, there are people that I wish I got to know. So it would definitely be in the past. So I really wished I had met Jim Henson. Would have loved to have worked with him. And I actually sold a concept to his network once he left his company, but it never evolved. But it was as close as I could be to him. I would have loved to have gotten to know John Lennon. And so people in the past, I don't know that I would have liked him as a person, but I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in Picasso's studio.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, those are two legends right there.
Yeah. And John Prine, who's a songwriter who I, is near and dear to my heart. We lost him in the pandemic, and would have loved to have met him and worked with him.
All right, awesome. And let's see, how about what's your favorite food?
Pizza.
Any particular kind or brand or anything, or just pizza in general?
Brand, we're both in LA. A friend of mine has a place called he has Golden State, but it's got Prime Pizza. They have a couple of them out. They use a sourdough starter and a thin crust. It's really good.
Okay. I'll have to check it out. I've never been there before.
Yeah.
All right. And then lastly, how about like what's like a show you watch or movie you watch or maybe a book you read where you've got like a really good learning or piece of wisdom that you could share?
Wow, there's so many of them. You know, the two things came up. First one, my mom gave me a book called The Courage to Create, which was like, I think she gave it to me in high school, and it was about creativity. And the only takeaway that I might have just skimmed through it because I don't really remember much, but the one thing that stayed with me was one of the modes of creativity was through chaos. And given the state of my room when I was a kid, I thought, I like this idea. And I'm looking at my studio. It's got a little bit of a chaotic theme to it. My sister calls it a piling system rather than a filing system. So that seemed to be a gem that stayed with me. And I mean, we could talk for hours about, influences, but I just finished Cloud Cuckoo Land, which is an adult book, not for kids. And it was 600 and something pages, and I could not put it down. Wow. It was multiple stories, and you knew as soon as you started reading it that these seemingly individual stories were somehow going to come together. And I was so impressed, and it felt like a Neanderthal with what I'm writing next to what this guy created, and the mind to weave these things together and what he knew. So that was more of just an inspiring. There's a fine line between, for me, being inspired and intimidated sometimes. This kind of waffled in and out of that one. It was like, this is amazing. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm terrible. It's just, but it was inspiring ultimately.
Well, that's good. It's like a bit of an emotional roller coaster, which is what you want out of a story, right? To get really engaging.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's a tome, 600 pages.
But I'm a slow reader, but I just, that was my thing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. So
okay.
I was like browsing your website, and you've been writing books, children's books, since like the 80s, since before even I was born. And you've been at it a long time, and you've written dozens of books. So I'm just curious, like, how did you get into writing children's books? Is that something you always wanted to do, or like how did you get there?
It's so interesting. I'll step back a hair, which was, my mom was a reading and studies skills counselor at UCLA. And I think being involved in education at a university kept her in the forefront of a lot of philosophies that impacted me. One of which was, she would never buy me a coloring book. She said, why would you create, art for somebody who's already created it? Make your own. So she would, my life was, and I have a closet over there full of sketchbooks that she bought me as a child. And so I think that it shaped who I was as a kid. And I was a musician, even though I like to draw. And I went to take an art class after college, a lithography class, which is a type of printmaking. And it's just that serendipity thing. The registrar, this was at Otis Art Institute, which is in LA. She said, well, we have a great children's book writing class and writing and illustration. And I looked at her like, so? And she said, there's only one opening, and the teacher's great, and she's only here for the summer. And I don't know what possessed me to say yes. I'm actually having dinner with this teacher tonight. And I walked into this class, and she was this firecracker of a woman, Barbara Botner, still is. And for the first month, every assignment she gave, I felt like I was in the wrong class. Just couldn't click. And everybody drew better than me. I mean, I have a very naive style. And I did a drawing one day, and Barbara said, I love this. You need to write a book about this. Don't do any of the other homework, which was a great thing to hear. And I had no clue how to write, but I kept drawing. And with her tutelage and sweat and effort, she helped me shape a story. And it actually sold the same summer that I wrote it, which is unusually rare. It doesn't happen very often. So that's what launched. And I thought, oh, I'm rich. I got $1,000 advance. I quit my job. Big education for me as to how you make a living as a children's book writer.
Made it to the big time, right?
Oh yeah. Then I became a singing waiter. That's how well my first book did.
Wow, that's cool. That's a cool story. And so do you illustrate all your own books as well?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Now it's time for another Deep Thoughts with Greg. And serendipity. I want to talk about serendipity a little bit today. I was just loving Barney's story about how he went to this art college, and the registrar was just kind of like, hey, we have this children's writing class. And he's like, okay, whatever. And he's like, just, all right, I'll just take it. Why not? And for the first couple months, he even thought that he was in the wrong class. He was doing the wrong thing. But because of his teacher, he was inspired. And I mean, now he's on this show today talking about his illustrious career as a children's book author. So I think it's funny how sometimes we just fall into place wherever we're supposed to be without even realizing it. And that's why I think it's also so important for, well, people in general to just try a whole bunch of different things. It's really easy for us to just get into our grooves and stick with what's comfortable. And not that there's anything wrong with sticking with what's comfortable, but that's why, at least in my own personal life, I'm always trying to try new things, even things that I think that I might not like, because you never know. And additionally, it's also a great idea, I think, to just really let kids try a whole bunch of stuff, especially kids when they're young, or even up all the way up to teenagers. Like, they're just more open to experiences than adults are. So one of the things that my mom did for me, which I really appreciate, is she just let me do all sorts of stuff. So I was playing all sorts of sports, soccer, baseball, basketball, but I also did gymnastics. So I dressed in like a little leotard, and I went and bounced on the trampoline and did the uneven bars and the balance beam and all sorts of stuff, which was really fun. And I tried, I don't know, like race cars and Legos and engineering sets. So read a ton to me, read a whole bunch of different kinds of books. And so she really like exposed me to a lot of different experiences. And then I kind of got gravitated towards the ones I liked, and the other ones that I didn't like so much or didn't really call to me just kind of fell by the wayside. So, and also, like, I know that I probably back at the time was complaining like, oh, Mom, I don't want to go do gymnastics, like it's for girls or something like that. But looking back, I remember I actually had a lot of fun and I really enjoyed it. So even though your kids may protest, maybe push them a little bit and make them give it a try. And then if they really don't like it, then you can be like, all right, we'll move on. But you never know. Maybe they'll fall in love with it. So that's something I just wanted to stop and say, sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be. And so if you want to do that with your kids, you can give them a little nudge and see if they might like something that they might otherwise never have tried. So anyway, now Barney's going to start talking about his amazing new book, What Do You See? And how that book actually engenders friendship and understanding of one another. So it's a really beautiful book. And he wrote it with Jamie Lee Curtis, the actress. So let's hear Barney tell his tales.
All right. Well, you got a new one. I think it just came out at the beginning of March, right?
March 1st.
March 1st. So it's called What Do You See? And I was just curious if you, there it is right there. Yep. All right. Yep, so could you share a little bit about what it's about and what's inside?
This was an amazing journey, and I am the poster child for tenacity, because this was not, in spite of who I did this with, an easy book to get published. Years ago, I was at a school in LA, and a private school, and one of the moms who was doing the event happened to be Jamie Lee Curtis. And she walked up to me to shake my hand. She goes, "Hi, I'm Jamie Lee Curtis, and I hate you." I was like, "Well, why do you hate me?" And I was like, "Duh, I know who you were." And she said, "Because you illustrate your own books." And I said, "Well, I'd love to illustrate one of yours." And she said, "Well, she had this relationship with Laura, her illustrator. And out of all the movie stars I've ever known, or not even known, but whose work I've read, she to me is the best at children's books. She has a feeling for it in a way that I don't see other people. Plus, her illustrations really it's a perfect marriage of her words and her illustrations. So I knew I was never going to get to illustrate a book for her. And we kept bumping into each other. And I was at a bookstore doing a book signing, and everybody left at the end, and I was signing stock and looked up, and Jamie was standing there with her arms folded. And she said, we should hang out. And she gave me her phone number. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is never going to happen. And I was working on a story called, Would You Rather Be a Princess or a Dragon? And I was having trouble. And the takeaway is you can be both. And I just thought it had the sensibilities that Jamie would get. And I sent her a note and asked her if I could take her to coffee. And she ended up coming over. And it started this friendship. And I was working on a book called Beautiful Oops, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it's my probably best-selling book. Mm-hmm. And she ended up writing a blurb on it. And it shows how you can take what you think is a mistake and turn it into art. And it's a big life lesson. From that day on, she started texting me photographs. And she likes shooting stuff, whether it's on a lot of stuff on the ground. She seems to look at the ground a lot. Weird thing. And it was always like Christmas. The second it came, I'd stop everything, run over to my iPad, open up that photograph, and then draw on it and send it back. And to get her to respond, and they were always favorable, was like such an ego boost and such a fun. It was just this dance we became, involved with. And after years of these texting, she said, we should do a book. And we met for lunch, and I wrote it based on our texts, but it was really a joint effort. But everywhere we went, every publisher wanted it to be written by her.
Ah, okay, I see.
It's not the case. And it was a problem, because she's known as, well, obviously an actor, but a children's book writer, and a successful one at that. She wanted just credit as a photographer, which is in truth what she is. And it took a great deal of not wanting to drop this project for me to finally find a publisher. And Creston Book, which is a teeny tiny publisher out in the Bay Area in San Francisco, got it. She got it and enhanced it and embellished it and made this into what it is and took a shot at it. And I'm very proud of what it is. So just as an example, Jamie sent me this picture of a
shell.
Yeah. And my response was this.
All right. A little chicken. All right.
And there we are on the back.
Amazing.
And the takeaway from this book is that, and it's really important right now, it's aspirational. Two friends can look at the same thing and see it differently and still like each other. I think we're so divided right now that I feel like this is a really good time for this book to come out. So that's what it is. And the whole book is just a series of images that she sent to me and how I interpreted them.
Yeah, I think that really is such a beautiful message, especially right now. Everything's getting super polarized and everything's really divisive. And to be able to we look at the same thing in different light, but we can still be friends. I think that's such a great message.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. I didn't even know Jamie Lee Curtis was into writing children's books, because I always just think of her as Halloween, right? That's her big claim to fame. No. So to be she's writing children's books now, that's super interesting.
They've been seriously successful.
Amazing.
Really, there's been a lot of actors that have come out with books and you kind of cringe looking at them.
Yeah.
Not hers.
All right, cool. Well, that's amazing. All right. Well, it sounds like a great partnership then.
Absolutely.
So I know that you've been at it for a long time, and obviously you're a very creative person with your music and your art and your books and everything. And I'm just wondering, do you think creativity is something that's just innate, that's born in people, or is it actually a skill that can be taught and learned?
Yes, both.
Both. Okay.
Again, as I mentioned with the sketchbooks that my mom gave me, you can cultivate creativity. And I think by having me have sketchbooks rather than coloring in other people's art with this coloring book, clearly planted the seed for creating things. And I've been working with this incredibly brilliant woman, Dr. Cindy Burnett, and she, for 17 years at the University of Buffalo, her field is the science of creativity. And I met her speaking in Buffalo, and we've done a series of YouTube videos on a channel called Creativity.
Okay.
Creativity. And I've learned so much about this because I had this sort of innate gravitation towards creating without really knowing what I'm doing. And she's got a way to give exercises, and we've done all these Zoom classes together showing you how you can push your own creativity. And it can be taught. I never really thought about it before, but absolutely. She also, just to plug her, has a beautiful website, Creativity and Education. And it talks about in the classroom, at home, all the places where you can help cultivate creativity.
Okay, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I had this experience. I was like an engineer. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering. So like in another life, I was very like math minded, science minded, logical. But then in high school, I actually took a drawing and I couldn't draw. Like I couldn't do anything artistic. I couldn't paint or anything like that. I could barely draw like color inside the lines. But then I took this drawing class in high school, and they kind of taught me like a system, and it made sense to my mind. Like, oh, first you do this, you measure it this way, you look at it this way. And then when I actually drew something, I was like, that actually looks like the thing that I was trying to draw. I was like very impressed with myself. And I actually got like a B or something in that class. And I was like, oh, well, I guess you can actually learn to be more creative if you just like actually break it down into the system. So that's why I wanted to ask you that.
Yeah, I have a 13-month-old grandson, and my wife and I were just in New York taking care of him when my daughter had some work there. And I realized that the playfulness that you have with a child from birth, how important it is. And my wife's capacity to allow this little boy to mess things up, whether it's smushing food on his plate or pulling the toilet paper roll and seeing what it does, tissues out of the tissue box, bringing in his first snow on a plate and letting him chew on it and dump it on the table. Like that kind of environment cultivates a curiousness, which helps us be creative. And you really can start from the moment they're born. And I think if you're in an environment like that, at home, if you're in a classroom where you are free to make mistakes and not be shamed, it allows anyone, whether you're an adult or a child, to take a little more risks. And I think when we're afraid to take a risk, we stop being creative.
100%. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm always trying to get my student, even in math, I'm like, hey, just try, take a guess.
Come on. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to do that. And look at science. I mean, if you knew that's it's all about discovery.
Exactly.
But if
it's about
came with an experiment and did it, and your professor or your boss said, well, that's dumb, and then there's that shame factor. When I did Beautiful Oops, I found a company online. I was Googling something about, how people deal with their mistakes. I found this company that every Friday at 10 a.m., everybody in the office got together and they talked about their biggest mistake of the week and how they were able to turn it around. Wow. And that creates a culture of, this is okay. It's part of the process.
Yeah, they normalize it rather than.
Yeah, the last one on that is somebody told me when they were a kid, and I've tried to write a children's book on this. It's never worked. They were told when they were learning to ride a two-wheeled bicycle that they had to fall 100 times before they learned. All of a sudden, falling is part of the process, and you don't feel like you're never going to be able to do it. It's like, wait, I learned how to ride in 20 falls. Look at how great I am. Instead of I fell 20 times. I mean, it's just that simple thing.
Yeah, it really just reframes everything into a different light. I just wrote a post about that earlier today. Like, we could look at our kids in a light and like with their negative aspects, or you can reframe it and turn it into something positive. Hey, I only fell 20 times. I was supposed to fall 100. Like, that's beautiful.
Right. Yeah. Well, look what that does. Or when you tell a kid, that's not how to draw a cat, or the sky isn't that color, they start shutting down. So it's like, wow, I never thought of a purple sky. That's amazing. And your cat has 3 ears. That's fantastic. Where do they come from? Is there a family of them? Are they the one of a kind? If they are one of a kind, how do the other cats relate to this cat? I mean, you can play that up so that, wow, you want to continue playing like that and discovering stuff. As opposed to, sorry, cats don't look like that. I had art teachers like that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that is not the way we draw this. Like, whoa, and then you don't want to draw.
Yeah.
And it goes way beyond art. It goes
totally. Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it is, again, from a math perspective, because I like view math as a very creative pursuit. And like, there's some teachers that are very rigid, like you have to get to the answer this way that I teach you, and then kids get all like bent out of shape, and then they don't like math anymore. And I'm more of like, whatever way you want to go is fine, like just go, and if you get to a valid answer, then all good, like be creative.
Yeah.
And now in this time of the pandemic and everything, like, why do you think it's so important to teach creativity to kids?
I think in an effort to grow as individuals and as a society, it's it infuses an ability to be adaptable and to continue to grow in a way that we need to survive. We're dealing with so many things all at once that can be so overwhelming. And to stop, take a breath, think this is, I'm going to be quarantined in my house for, we didn't know how long.
Yeah, it was only 6 weeks back in the beginning.
I'm not doing, my wife, it was like 2 weeks. She said that she had to leave work for 2 weeks. I don't know what I'm going to do. And we learn to adapt. If you don't, you kind of, I'm going to say you're going to die is a little extreme, but something dies within you if you are so rigid. And I think that creativity, and again, it's not like to become the next Picasso or Segovia on the guitar. It's to find a way to deal with your neighbors, or in the traffic you're driving in, or what are your workload. It's just sort of really essential to being able to cope and adapt and grow.
Yeah, especially when we were in like the deep lockdown, it's a perfect outlet. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, for my wife and I, it was again, it's how you frame things, as you said earlier. She used to get up in the morning, go to work, and I was here working, and we'd have dinner and fall asleep. And then it was like, wow, you're still here. Well, let's have lunch together. Let's work on a puzzle. Let's take more walks. And it was, once you kind of got into, this is how things are going to be, what can we do so that we can not go crazy? Because we're not getting on an airplane and going on a trip, and an appreciation for things in a different way. And had a lot of fires in the fireplace, and played a lot of, I missed really playing music with other people. It's really hard for me in that way. But I found an app called Acapella, which allowed you to like play all the parts. It wasn't quite the same, but although I wrote a song called "We're Alone Together" when it just started, and I put it on Facebook. And I had been in Russia, not a great subject at the moment.
Yeah.
Through the State Department had sent me to China and Russia to talk about creativity many years ago. Mm-hmm. And my translator from Moscow asked if she could record the song with some women in Moscow. And they all played it at their own houses alone on their ukuleles. And then I had friends in the States work on it, and we put together a video of people around the world singing this song. So again, it was the need to create, to keep my mind going, and to feel like I wasn't isolated. And this was how we are isolated as a collective, as the world. It was a time we've never had before.
Absolutely. That's a really cool experience too. I'll have to check out that video.
Yeah.
All right. So Barney and I were talking a lot about creativity, and I asked him if creativity is innate or if it can be learned, because it was in my experience that, like I mentioned, I didn't have any sort of creativity as far as like art goes. But then I took that drawing class, and it kind of opened my eyes, like, oh, maybe I actually could learn this if I put time and effort into it. And Barry said that it's both innate and it can be learned. So it's both. It's actually both. And I agree with that. Which really is for most skills in life. Like there's going to be some people that start further down the racetrack than other people, but with enough practice and effort, anyone can get at least decently good in any particular skill, whether it's creativity and art or whether it's mathematics, like what I teach. Even kids that feel like they're not math people, I think sometimes it's just if they just tried harder or they had better teachers or something like that, it's just like a little key that unlocks. And then that could really open a whole new doors for them. So that's why I'm a really big believer in growth mindset and teaching growth mindset. And I think a lot of people also think that like creativity is just this like, oh, what's the word? Like just, it's kind of this wispy thing that just like some people just have it, right? They're just like creative folks. And again, it's possible that some people just have it naturally, but it can also be developed. You can also work on it. And there's exercises that can be done, which Barney is going to talk about in a moment here. But before we get to that, I also wanted to add just that how important creativity is. Because again, a lot of times when we go to school, we learn a lot about math and English and science, which is all good stuff. But like if the budget gets tight, what is the first thing that gets cut? Probably PE, and then like art, right? Dance and drawing and painting, because those aren't viewed as essential. But I think creativity is so important. And as Barney was talking about, not just for creating beautiful art or aesthetically pleasing art or something, but just like navigating day-to-day life. Like, can you come up with a creative solution if you're having a fight with your neighbors? Or can you come up with a creative solution if you're having an issue with your boss at work? Creativity isn't just about creating art. It's about having those creative solutions show up in your life. So I think it's really important to teach your kids creativity, and it'll help them not only become more creative, maybe in the artistic realm, but just better able to adapt to life and be adaptable. So, all right, now let's jump back, and Barney's going to start teaching you some ways you can actually implement creativity practice at home with your family. So let's get back to it.
And so, yeah, like creativity is a really important outlet for parents and adults as well as children. And do you have some ways that maybe parents could help instill that creativity or build that creativity into their day-to-day lives with their kids?
Yeah. Well, I saw it again. Spending time with a 13-month-old was a reminder of all the things you can do, whether it's playing games when they're in the bathtub, or at the table, or when you're walking. I mean, this is a huge thing, and I always feel like I'm on my stump speech, and it sounds really negative, but I'm going to say it anyway. It makes me crazy when I see parents driving with their kids and the kids have headphones on, or they're looking at their iPads, or the parents are pushing a kid in a stroller and they're on their earbuds talking to a friend. We spent so much time with our kids when they were little, talking to the birds, looking for squirrels. Mm-hmm. There was these pods. We would write songs about the pods we'd find on the street. Being playful with your kids is so important. And I feel like it's not to teach, well, it is to teach them, but it's not like with a end result in mind. You're having a flexibility with what you're doing with them. But what happens is if the kids see you as playful, it's not like, well, I'm going to be texting my friend and you go create. It's like, we're doing this together. Mm-hmm. Because the phone it's really making some issues. I'm seeing it a lot. And I'm a victim of it as well. This glowing device that's got the world in it. But to have a kid see you as an adult, be willing to be silly, be willing to mess up and not melt down, what that telegraphs to a kid. So I was in China about almost a year before the pandemic started. They had bought my book, Beautiful Oops. And I was on a tour, literally standing on stages in Shanghai and Beijing in front of hundreds of people.
Wow.
And what we did, I always suggest people try. So I had paper passed out to all the families and crayons. Now, when you ask an adult to draw, a lot of the response is going to be like what yours was. I can't draw a straight line, all this stuff. So I'd say, now put the crayon in your non-dominant hand. Close your eyes and make a mark on your page, just a squiggle, like you're testing it out to see if it works. And then open your eyes and give that piece of paper to your kid. Have them make something out of it. Now, you could leave it alone and go, it's a noodle doing yoga, it's a dancing snake, or I can connect those dots or that line and create a hippopotamus. Now have your kid make a squiggle and you do it. And I know this is uncomfortable for a lot of people, but I saw, somehow by doing it with your non-dominant hand, it gives you an out. Well, I did it with the hand I don't draw with. And it looks silly. Fine. You're giving your kids such a gift at that moment because they're seeing you're willing to mess up. And look, dad messed up that drawing. I can mess up mine too.
Yeah.
And it's just huge. It's huge. So to play with your kids, I and I'm not saying you have to play Monopoly or Parcheesi. It's drawing with them. It's making mashed potato snowmen. It's finger paint with chocolate pudding on wax paper. I mean, it's just playing and having kids delight in that. And it's not a glowing tablet that kind of sucks some of your mind out.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a time for all of it, but I do encourage play with kids.
I think it's fascinating that you were talking about doing that exercise with everyone, because this just started developing recently with one of my students. He's a bit younger, and he just kind of like drew a squiggle on the whiteboard while I was helping him with math. And then I like drew on it and turned it into some sort of picture. And then he's like, all right, now you draw something and I'll turn it into something. And now it's like kind of like a thing that we just do for fun. And like, we take turns just drawing like a line or a squiggle. And then the other person turns it into an alligator or a building or whatever. And it actually is really fun. It really does build creativity, because it's like just some random line. And then you're like, well, what could I turn that into?
Exactly. And you can take it further, where I've done it in classrooms where I've had break the room into pairs of kids, have them each make their squiggles, switch, draw something, switch, name it, switch, give it some characteristics. Do you know a grumpy neighbor? Is it your aunt, from Philadelphia? What is it? Does it smell like perfume? Is this a one-off character? Is there a family of them? And then give them some situations and you'll make up stories. My dad used to do this where we called it beep. He would say, start a story. And you say, there was a tree in the backyard, beep. And then the next person would go, it was so tall that it blocked out the sun, beep. And we would make up stories, just improvising. It's a great gift.
That's really cool. That sounds fun. Maybe I'll try that with my students.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely is.
So I think Barney's exercises for developing creativity are amazing, because those are things that I actually just kind of stumbled upon myself. Even as a child or as an adult, I mentioned that I was doing the squiggle exercise with one of my students, and it worked really well. It was super fun. But even when I was very young, my friends and we wrote this story called The Messed Up Tale of Bob, Bobby, and Cecil. And what happened is one person would go and they'd write part of the story for 10 minutes or so, and while the other two played like in the basement or something, and then we just trade off, and like every 10 minutes someone else would go and write. And the interesting thing is no one really knows where the story is going to go when they sit down and write, because you have no idea what the person wrote before you. But next thing you know, we had written like a 100-page story in Microsoft Word, and it was incredible just to see it develop over a few weeks. We just did this for a little while when we were young. And that really is the heart of improvisation. Like, I did an improv class when I was a little younger, when I was like in my mid-20s. And that's all it is two people or more walk onto a scene. One person does something, and then the other person just has to react. And then you just create a whole scene that way. Like, no one knows where it's going to go. At the beginning, you just kind of free flow. So that's why these exercises like doing little squiggles, or like Barney said, the beep exercise, where you just create a story like one line at a time and you can say beep in between. It's incredibly powerful for really developing free thought, being able to think on your feet. So it's a really powerful tool for kids to learn, being able to just like think very nimbly and have that very creative thoughts just like burst into their head quickly without having to think too much. And it's a skill, it's a practice. So like I mentioned this in one of my blog posts, that, or one of my reels actually on Instagram, that another exercise you can do is called just, I call it 10 things. So you just come up with a prompt like, what would be the 10 coolest cross breeds of animals you'd like to see? And kids have to sit down and be like a dolphin and a tiger, or a dragon and a moose, and just write down 10 things that fit that particular prompt or category. And that's another way to just build creativity. And like I mentioned in the reel, and I think with some of these exercises, maybe at first your kids may be a little like, oh, I don't know what to do, or I may be resistant to it. It's because it's a skill that maybe they don't have yet. So you need to practice it. And as they practice it more, it'll be more fun, it'll be more engaging. And the sillier you make it, the sillier and more fun it is. And then the kids will relax into it more. So if you just make it silly and it's just fun and it's no big deal, and then they can relax and do it, and then it'll be crazy to see how creative your kids can be, because kids are like the most creative creatures out there. They just come up with like the wildest things, and I'm just like, wow, I never even thought of that before, but now that you brought it up, that's actually a really good point. So there's a few exercises for you to practice creativity at home, and they're really simple. This takes a couple minutes, or it could take an hour. It's like really no time limit. It's however long you're having fun with it. All right, so now we're going to steer a little bit away from creativity, and Barney's going to start talking about communication and how to communicate with your kids, because he's a children's author and people keep buying his books, right? So obviously he's doing something right with his communication skills through his books. So he's going to talk a little bit about that. So stay tuned. We got more stuff, great stuff coming up from Barney.
And so like I mentioned before, you've been at this for a long time. You seem to have like a really good knack for just communicating these stories to people, because people keep buying your books, right? So I'm just wondering, is there a way that parents can communicate with their children better? Like, do you have some ways that parents can communicate with their kids like you do?
Yeah, put your phone away. That's number one.
Right.
I actually wrote a book that nobody wants to publish called and it's a parent doing this, going as the kid's talking. And I mean, all these parents are missing everything. There's elephants walking by. There's just crazy things happening, and they're So yeah, that's a huge thing. Back to my stump speech again. Again, I go back to playing with your kids. Reading with them, telling stories, singing songs. Even if you can't sing, let them talking about things at the table. I mean, if you be interesting to come to the table. I'm making this up. Tonight there's no silverware.
Oh.
What can we use in the kitchen to eat? You're laughing, but it's like, I mean, go into the drawer and find a spatula.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, or a drumstick that you might have, or, and it's like, what if we had to eat without our hands? Could we do that tonight?
I'm just laughing because I think that'd be super fun. Like, I'd be super into that game.
I always actually thought about having a birthday when I was in college, where I would get a really fancy restaurant, we'd get a room and have no silverware in there and just see what people did. All right, go for it. See what where anything is possible. You're just like, you make dinner tonight. I always think about this woman I heard, I wish I knew who she was, years ago being interviewed, and she had written a cookbook, and she talked about having such an eclectic palette. She liked all kinds of things, and the interviewer said, what do you attribute that to? And she said her parents had her try everything as a kid, and the caveat was, if you don't like it, you can spit it out. And she said, what kid wouldn't like that opportunity? And it got her to taste everything. And I feel like that's really what our jobs are as the adult in the room. Expose them to things and let them try. And the more things they try, they're going to just grow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
you're at the whole like the phone thing. I'm guilty of it too. Just like always being like head
We
down,
all are.
like my head's going down. But I also like, especially like when you're driving with your kids in the car, you have like a captive audience, right? They can't go anywhere. Oh, yeah. So that's like a perfect time to engage with them as well.
And when my kids were like in middle school, they don't want to talk to you about certain right. things. And it's this great thing if they're still sitting in the back seat, you don't have to have eye contact, but you do have a captive audience. But if they're plugged in, you're chopped liver.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I just think it's really impressive that you've had such a long career. I'm curious from your creative mind, like how do you come up with your ideas for your books? Are they just kind of like pop in? Is it inspirational, or do you have to work at it at all, refine them?
All of the above. I tell kids that, when you work out with weights, you get like stronger. And I always say, like, you get a six pack. I said, I have a six pack here. I can use one elsewhere. But it is a muscle, this creativity thing. And I think the more I've used it, the more I'm able to access it. Now, I can get ideas all day long. It used to drive my kids crazy because they would say anything and I'd go, book title, band name, Dad, I just need to go to the bathroom. There's a title, but I'm always thinking about it. Now, just because I've got a title doesn't mean it's going to necessarily work, but I'm in that mindset from the time I'm 8. I was 8 when, we wanted to have a band. I was always thinking of names, thinking of songs. Now it's stories. I was just in Brooklyn and started playing with bagels and thought, oh, I'm going to do a bagel board book. Why not? What can I make out of bagels? So yes, I'm constantly evolving, and I come out to my studio like a person would show up at a regular job. I don't wait for inspiration to hit me. I do push. Yesterday I was given a task to try to do something that seemed impossible. And I'm a big believer. I've learned about this with OOPS, which is the concept of thinking with your hands. Like I couldn't have written OOPS. I couldn't have written my book with Jamie.
Yeah.
If I had just sat down and go, well, if she gave me a seashell, what would I draw on it? Let me think about it. I'm going to write on. I had to do it. Did I know what I was going to draw when I looked at it? No. But by doing it, it might be different in the math world. You might have to do some calculations in your head, but you probably start writing them down. And it's just the response to what's happening at that moment allows you. And the first things could be terrible.
Yeah.
But you keep going. And I think that's the other side of the playful aspect of this is not to give up.
Like in the math world, it's very similar. Like the kids, they always want to be able to just get to the answer right away. And sometimes they can't see it. So I'm always like, well, what would you do first? And just start there. And then once you do the first thing, all right, then what would you do next? And then what would you do next? And then eventually they usually find themselves at the answer, but you never know until you take that first step and just go for it.
And I think that same idea that you want to have the problem solved, we want to have our picture framed, or we want to have a fridge. And you know what? I can't draw monkeys very well, but I keep practicing until I get them right. And there's 80 of them on the floor that didn't work out. That's part of it.
Yeah, you just, like you said, with the oops, you just gotta try and just keep practicing, and that's what it's all about.
In that vein, the book Where the Wild Things Are, this famous Maurice Sendak book for the ages, he originally wrote Where the Wild Horses Are. Couldn't draw horses in a way that he was happy, and he created wild things. But he didn't go, well, I can't draw horses, so I'm not going to do it. He came up with something else.
And now here we are. Now here we are. It's one of the most famous children's books out there.
Absolutely.
All right, Barney. Well, this has been such a pleasure. We're just gonna start wrapping it up here.
Okay.
Do you have any like resources or like on like websites or apps or anything that you'd like to share that maybe parents could check out if they wanted to explore this creativity?
Yeah, what I talk, well, mine is barneysaltzberg.com,
Okay.
and you might have that written down somewhere. Creativity and education, my friend Cindy's site is full of amazing resources. And then the YouTube channel that we have, Cindy and I, which is Creativity on YouTube, has tons of exercises that anyone at any age can try, and they will definitely help you way beyond art. I mean, just as an example, one of them was tolerating ambiguity.
Ooh.
That was the pandemic for me. And the coping skills I learned from that exercise have been incredibly helpful. Wow. So yeah, creativity is definitely worth checking out.
Okay, I'll have to check that. I mean, no
Yeah.
joke, like dealing with ambiguity. That's a big one, especially now.
Hello. Yeah.
And then finally, like you mentioned a few places, but is there anywhere else on the internet for people want to check you out or check out your books more? Like, where could they find you out there?
Again, if you just put my name in, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that I've been doing, going to schools. A lot of times people video that stuff and put it up, and just interacting with kids, but my name, and it's a lot of the links are on my website on the page.
Amazing. All right, Brian. Well, thank you so much for coming on Pandemic Parenting. It's been a pleasure, and I feel like I learned a lot today.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
All right.
All right, and now it's time for the wrap-up recap. Today, we talked with Barney about creativity and how creativity shows up in his life and how you can instill it in your kids' lives and how it can be developed and worked on. And also, why it is so important to learn creativity to be more adaptive. It's not just about art and creating beautiful art, but it's about being able to think freely, think on your toes, and if you put that and instill that in your kids at an early age, it'll serve them really well moving forward in life. And then the last little bit, Barney talked about, just basically engage with your kids, be playful with your kids. You go to the dinner table, we're not going to eat with silverware tonight, and what are we going to do? And just make it fun. We get so, I think, rigid with our routines sometimes. And I think it's great to play little games like that just like breaks the rules. And you're like, oh, we don't always have to eat with silverware. That's not a thing that's absolutely necessary. That's something that we just created and we just keep doing it and doing it. But every once in a while, it's good to like break out of the mold, just have fun with it and play. So overall message is engage with your kids and have fun with them. And you can help produce that creativity in all aspects of their life. So I would like to once again thank you for tuning in to Pandemic Parenting. It's been a pleasure this week having Barney on, and I know I learned a lot. And I hope you learned a lot too. So until next time, I love you all. Have a good rest of your day or night or wherever you are in the world. We'll see you next time.